hip stability and core stability simultaneously. But I think at the end of the day, it's not just about running and jumping, right? The specificity of power development is a powerful thing. And so here's something that's interesting. I wrote an article, I think it was back in the end of 2010. It was an article called What I Learned in 2010, where I just recapped a bunch of random things that I had kind of been stumbling upon and putting out there. And one of the things I talked about was that I think power development is very, very plane specific. Meaning just because I get efficient at doing vertical jumps or doing broad jumps, I don't know that it's going to carry over to throwing velocity, rotational med ball throws, things like that. On my end, I've just seen way too many guys with bad bodies come in and vertical jump 18 inches and then go out and throw 95 miles per hour. It was just one of those things where power didn't seem to be power. And so I threw it out there, not really thinking anything more of it other than, hey, this is something that's dictating how we train people. I'm not sure that these sagittal plane linear modalities are really carrying over to throwing velocity. And what's pretty cool was a couple months later, I got an email from a guy named Graham Lehman, who was doing his master's thesis up in Canada. And he said, hey, it's funny that you mentioned this because I'm doing my master's thesis on this exact right now. And we're finding that there's really no predictive value of vertical jump, things like that, to throwing velocity in collegiate level pitchers. So I was like, all right, that's cool. And sure enough, it was published early in 2012 in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning Research. And they really found the greatest carryovers were coming from like lateral hop, skaters, heights, things like that, as well as rotational throw for distance. So if we're talking about predictive value, the more specific you get with the context of power development, the better off you're going to be. And we just can't expect to have this magical carryover to rotational power from training straight ahead all the time. So, what are some things that we're working with as we go through this stuff? Rotational med ball throws, right? So basic rotational shot put. We get a good scapula by keeping that elbow up reasonably high. And again, you see the sequencing. The hips goes before the shoulder goes. So we still get that separation that you would see with throwing, with hitting, anything like that. And Matt's actually a good example because he was a converted catcher. So he caught and played first base and then pitched in the Red Sox organization. Rotational scoop toss, maybe a little bit more of a shoulder and elbow friendly modality. But again, get into that hip, get out of that hip. It's all about weight transfer. Hips go first. I don't know who this guy is, but he's super athletic and has much more hair in that video than he does now. And we can add a little bit of a hip preload. So get into that hip and then get out of it. Just realizing how old this video is. Tyler's a sophomore in college right now. But just shows the importance of learning to progress things, right? Once you've established how that hip motion should look, then learn to get into that hip more dynamically and then get out of that hip. And obviously we're making sure that we do this stuff dynamically on both sides. We're not just doing one side. These guys need to be symmetrical, or closer to symmetrical, I should say. I don't think any of us are really symmetrical. Recoiled shot put. So here we don't have to worry much about catching it. Just let it go. Make sure you follow through, come over that front side. So a big part of being successful as a pitcher or hitter is understanding how to stiffen up at the right time on that front side. So Tim's a great example of that. Step behind shot put, maybe a little bit more momentum. Learning to transfer that force effectively. Step behind. Again, so just more momentum. Learn to move a little bit more dynamically. This is what we're going to give to a kid on the first day, right? We're going to give him time to build up to this and be successful. Hot feet, maybe a little bit more dynamic changes to that center of gravity. Okay, so his base of support stays somewhat constant when his feet are on the ground, but when we constantly move his feet back and forth, you're realizing that that's a constantly changing base of support, and the center of gravity has to be repositioned inside of it throughout that whole exercise. We also do a lot of overhead variations. Overhead med ball stomp, great for building some anterior core control and decelerating that med ball in that top position. So you can get some lat length, you can get some anterior core control while developing some power. But you can also progress that to make it a little bit less sagittal plane dominant. So recoiled rollover stomp. You see here Matt's getting some thoracic mobility as he goes through. He gets some glute activation in that top position. So again, just gets people out of their comfort zone, and this is the kind of stuff you want to see. And I know that there'll be more presentations about this over the course of the day, is that, a lot more push-pull stuff, a lot more unilateral rowing and pressing, doing, your thoracic mobility exercises on one side and then the other, as opposed to doing them together. These are valuable things. Split stance overhead throw to the wall, learning how to stiffen up on that front side, but also come over it effectively to begin to train yourself how to create this good long deceleration arc. Okay? So again, a little bit more sagittal plane, but what do we know about being in the sagittal plane? When you're in single leg stance, you're also stabilizing in that frontal and transverse plane. Okay? recoiled overthrow. Again, make it a little bit more rotational. He's slightly closed off on his front leg. So again, get into that back hip and then get out of it and learn to accept force on that front side a little bit more effectively. You know, I've talked a lot about power development early on, but what about accepting power? You can only speed up what you can slow down. All right, so it's very important to be able to transfer force and accept it with that lower half. And we'll get into that a little bit more in a few minutes here. Good. Exercise that takes a lot of thoracic mobility, hip mobility, and core stability to make that force transfer effectively from the lower half. Curl hop to overhead med ball throw. I like this one a lot just because it's a good chance for guys to be athletic. A little tough to make them do it on their non-dominant side, as you'll see, but learn to get up and create a good downhill plane over that front side. It's a good chance to see how athletic Tim is too. Overhead sledgehammer swings to the tire. This is a great video just because he has an awesome beard. He looks like Paul Bunyan. So this is taken during No Shave November, but you're building some anterior core stability, you're challenging rotary stability here, and you're also getting some great thoracic spine mobility as you go through. That you're actually, from a kind of an eccentric control standpoint, the tire gives off a lot of vibrations back to you, so you've got to understand how to control it. So, you know, how do we implement all this stuff? You know, we may do between 240 and 360 throws per week. Really during the months of probably October, November, December is when this is most prominent. Usually guys will come back from their long season. They get a little bit of a, 3 or 4 weeks of downtime before we really ramp up and start training rotation again. That 3 to 4 weeks is a great opportunity for us to build some core stability, get their hip and thoracic mobility back to where it needs to be, and then we get back to, hey, we got to start developing some power so that when you guys pick up a ball in November, December, January, whenever it may be, you're going to hit the ground running and be able to carry some of that power over. So usually one rotational, one overhead variation each session, and as our throwing volume increases, meaning end of November, as we start to pick up a ball and play catch, that's when the med ball volume is going to kind of gradually start coming back down. So the more you throw, the less med ball stuff you do. And it goes right hand in hand with what you're doing on that continuum. What's going to happen? You're just basically gradually shifting them a little bit more to the left side of that continuum. You're still doing some work on the right side. You want to maintain that, keep it consistent, and not detrain it, but you need to make sure that you're not overloading them in everywhere. For everything you add, you got to take something away. I think Haydn's another great example. I talked about how a lateral hop was a little bit more predictive of throwing velocity. This is kind of what this looks like in terms of images. You'll notice as he lands, notice that knee is inside the foot, okay? This we call creating a positive shin angle. He needs to put himself in a position to push off and come back in the opposite direction. You can also see why we decided to go wider with the turf in our new facility. So we're about 6 feet wider at that one as well. So I'll play that one again for you. Again, what you're getting here is you're getting a pre-stretch of his glutes in 3 planes of motion, right? As he backs up into that hip, he's getting adduction, he's getting internal rotation, and he's getting hip flexion. That's a pre-stretch of those glutes in 3 planes of motion so that when he comes back off, he has to get into that hip and then learn to get out of it. So he's training both eccentrically and concentrically as he works his way through it. If we want to build on that, maybe make it a little bit more rhythmic, once people have gotten the hang of the shin angles, we'll do what's called a repeated lateral Haydn. Over, stick, step down, over, stick, step down, and then go. And we'll obviously come back in the other direction. So I like that one. Gets people maybe a little bit more focused on power development because they don't have to think quite as much about that landing to come back in the other direction. So, and then if we want to progress a little bit more, we want to make it maybe a little bit more reactive. We just say, hey, listen, spend a little less time on the ground. I know you might not get over as much, but I still want you to learn how to accept force and then get out of that hip. Band resisted Haydns.